What if vengeance did not announce itself with steel or flame? What if it came quietly, as water does, filling every vessel, seeping through every crack, until the whole world is soaked in its silence? Some say justice roars like thunder. But in Georgia, in the year 1847, it whispered. It whispered into the well. The land was heavy that summer, the kind that bent men's backs and drained the marrow from their bones. The fields of cotton lay vast and white beneath a sun too cruel to forgive, while cicadas droned like restless ghosts in the trees. The plantation stretched far across red clay soil, its big house standing stern at the crest of a hill, columns pale as bone, windows staring down like unblinking eyes. Beneath its shadow were the cabins, small, crooked, built from rough pine logs that still carried the scent of sap. Among them lived the girl. She was called Eliza by the mistress, though her true name had been taken long before she remembered it. She was perhaps 16, with eyes too old for her face and a silence that unsettled those around her. She worked where she was told, scrubbing floors, carrying water from the well, sewing in the dim quarters of the big house. But it was when she lingered near the well that people began to notice. The well itself was older than the house, dug deep into the earth when the first stones of the plantation were laid. Its stones were worn smooth by countless hands, and the bucket's rope groaned like an old man's back. The water within was cold, black, and secretive, reflecting only fragments of sky. For generations it had fed the family, the overseer, the enslaved. To drink from the well was to survive. To poison it would be to kill the beating heart of the place. Eliza knew this, though she never spoke of it. She moved like a shadow through the routines of the day. At dawn she carried pails of water to the kitchen where the cook sweated over pots of beans and pork fat. She swept dust from the grand stairwell, listening to the mistress's heels click like tiny hammers overhead. She pressed linens until her arms trembled, her face blank as marble. No one marked her more than any other, and yet, somehow, her silence gathered around her like a cloak. The family who owned the land was proud, loud, and decaying in their own way. The master, Colonel Josiah Harland, carried himself like a relic of old wars, his voice rough, his temper sharper than the cane he leaned upon. The mistress, Evelyn, wore silks that rustled like whispers and kept her pale face powdered, as though hiding the years that drank her beauty. Their children, 3 sons and a daughter, carried the arrogance of inheritance in their every gesture. And below them, scattered like seeds pressed into the soil, were the enslaved, men, women, children whose names were given, taken, and forgotten according to the whims of those who claimed to own them. But Eliza was different, though none could say why. Some evenings, when the sun dipped and the fields breathed smoke from their own heat, she would stand by the well, staring into its depths. Her reflection swam faintly in the water, not as a face but as a shadow, fractured by ripples. Once, another girl, younger and curious, asked her what she saw there. Eliza's answer was soft, almost inaudible. An ending. The summer dragged on, swollen with heat and unspoken tensions. Cotton bowls tore the hands that picked them. Whips cracked like gunfire in the distance. Laughter from the big house spilled over wine glasses, while hunger gnawed in the cabins. Yet beneath it all, something else stirred, something that had no voice, no shape. It was like the gathering of storm clouds beyond the horizon, unseen but felt in the bones. At night, Eliza would sit by the cabin window, the moonlight silvering her skin. She had a small scrap of cloth she kept hidden, embroidered with faint patterns of flowers. No one knew where it came from, whether it had been her mother's or whether she stitched it herself when no one watched. But she held it close, running her fingers along its threads as though weaving secrets into them. One evening, the mistress sent Eliza to fetch water for the supper table. She lowered the bucket, the rope sliding rough against her palms. The sound of it creaked through the stillness of dusk. When the bucket returned, dripping and full, she did not lift it immediately. She gazed down into the well, into that circle of darkness that smelled of stone and time. And for the briefest moment, her lips curved, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, into a smile. From that night forward, the well no longer seemed the same. The cook complained that the water tasted strange, faintly bitter. The master scolded her for foolishness, slamming his fist against the table so the glasses rattled. But others noticed it too. A field hand who drank deep swore the water left his stomach twisting. The overseer's wife claimed it smelled faintly of iron, like blood upon stone. Still, no one dared accuse, for who could poison water itself? Who could lay a hand upon the veins of the earth? And yet, whispers began. Whispers that clung to the edges of the cabins, that curled around the crackling fires at night. Whispers of the girl who watched the well, who said little, who carried a silence too heavy for her years. They remembered the faint smile. They remembered the way she lingered. But in the grand house, candles burned, music drifted, and laughter echoed in the halls, as though nothing were amiss. It was only when the first sickness came, a sudden fever that bent a servant double, that the disturbance grew undeniable. And so the story begins. The first sickness was dismissed as chance. A man in the fields bent over in the heat, his body racked with fever, his lips cracked and dry. The overseer declared it weakness, a failure of flesh unfit for work. He was dragged from the rows and left to mend in his cabin. Yet when dawn came, another had fallen, this time a young woman who churned butter in the kitchen, her face ashen, her stomach seized in knots. By the week's end, a shadow had passed across the plantation. The cough came first, then the cramping, then the shivering sweats that left sheets clinging wet to the skin. It did not strike all at once, but like a creeping tide, stealing one body after another. And always, it followed the water. Those who drank deepest from the well sickened most. The Mistress Evelyn pressed a scented cloth to her nose, declaring the illness a curse of swamp vapors rising in the heat. She ordered lavender burned in the halls, rosewater poured upon the steps. Yet the smell lingered, the faint bitterness in the water, the strange metallic tang upon the tongue. Colonel Josiah scoffed at talk of curses. Weakness, he snarled, his cane striking the floorboards. They sicken because they are soft. Water is God's gift, and only a fool sees poison in it. His denial was thunderous, but his eyes betrayed unease. He drank from a separate decanter, carried from town, though he would not confess it aloud. The enslaved, bound to the well, had no such luxury. Their buckets still drew the dark water. Their children still swallowed it in gulps. Each night, mothers knelt over their little ones, cooling their burning foreheads with the same water that betrayed them. And each night, the whispers grew sharper. It was not long before Eliza's name slipped into those whispers. She had always been quiet, and quietness is its own danger. In silence, men will plant their fears, their suspicions, their guilt. They remembered how she lingered at the well, how her gaze seemed to sink deeper than stone. They recalled her faint smile the night she fetched water for the mistress. A girl too silent, too watchful, too self-contained. The cook muttered at first. That child is touched. She sees things in the dark. Soon others repeated it, their voices low. She knows something. She's the reason. She's the shadow by the well. In the quarters, eyes followed her. Children moved away when she entered. Women turned their backs in uneasy silence. Even the men, tired, beaten, bound by labor, looked on her with wariness. For fear is swift, and it needs only the shape of a scapegoat to take root. And yet Eliza neither denied nor defended. She carried her pails as always, her face still, her lips sealed. If she heard the whispers, she gave them no life with answer. She moved like water itself, slipping past, shaping itself around stones, wearing them down without a sound. The illness spared no rank. Servants collapsed in the halls. Field hands staggered beneath the sun. Even the overseer's wife, once full of color, grew pale and frail. But when the sickness touched the Mistress Evelyn herself, the household erupted. It began at supper. She lifted a glass of water, the light catching the crystal, the liquid glinting faintly like steel. She sipped, and moments later her hand trembled. The glass slipped, shattering upon the floor. By midnight her stomach convulsed, her screams echoed down the corridors like torn silk. The doctor was summoned from town, his carriage rattling through the night. He examined her with grave hands, muttered Latin beneath his breath, and declared it a fever of the gut. But his eyes flicked toward the well, and his silence afterward was telling. He recommended wine in place of water. He recommended distance. Now, suspicion turned to frenzy. Colonel Josiah summoned every enslaved soul into the yard, his cane striking the ground like a judge's gavel. Lanterns burned, their flames licking the humid night. He paced before them, his eyes black with fury. Someone, he growled, has fouled what is ours. Someone has brought this curse upon this house. And I will have the name. Faces looked downward, bodies rigid with fear. But Eliza stood still, her eyes fixed not on him, but on the well beyond. The faint glimmer of moonlight shone upon its stones. And though her lips said nothing, the colonel's gaze followed hers, and his suspicion flared. You, he hissed, the cane rising to point at her. You who hover by that cursed hole. What have you done? Eliza's silence deepened. She did not plead. She did not protest. She did not bow her head. The stillness of her body was answer enough, an answer that was no answer, and therefore more damning than words. The others stepped back from her, as though distance might spare them. Whispers rose again, fierce, frightened, desperate. It's her. She did it. She brought this down. But the colonel did not strike her. Not yet. Fear held even him. To punish her might break the spell, but what if it unleashed it? He ordered her locked away in the smokehouse, a place of ash and shadows, where the air choked of burnt wood. And still, the sickness spread. In the days that followed, more fell. The plantation grew quiet, its routines unraveling. Cotton lay unpicked. Carts stood idle. Even the birds seemed to have fled, leaving only the rasp of cicadas and the creak of the well's rope. The grand house, once a place of laughter and music, reeked of sickness and silence. From the smokehouse, Eliza listened. She heard the coughing, the moans, the angry shouts, the whispered prayers. She traced the threads of her cloth scrap with her fingers, as though the pattern itself carried strength. Sometimes she hummed, faint and tuneless, a sound barely more than a breath. And those who passed by swore they heard it as a dirge, a song that did not belong to the living. It was then the legend began to take shape, not in the master's halls, but in the cabins, in the murmured tales passed from mouth to mouth. They said the girl had spoken to the well, whispered death into its depths. They said the water answered her, rising to serve her will. Some believed she had bartered with spirits, others that she herself had become one. The truth was unknowable. What was known was the sickness, the fear, the eyes that turned toward her even in her absence. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind passed over the plantation, the rope of the well creaked though no hands touched it. As though something below stirred. The air was thick with dread. And still, the worst was yet to come. Night fell heavier than before, pressing against the shutters, smothering the lamps. The plantation no longer breathed with the rhythm of labor, it gasped. Rooms that once rang with commands and footsteps now echoed only with coughing, retching, and the brittle crack of floorboards under weakened weight. Colonel Josiah sat in his study, his great chair pulled close to the fire. Sweat glazed his brow though the flames burned low. His glass trembled in his hand, not water, but whiskey, amber and sharp. He had not touched the well in weeks, yet still unease gnawed at him. He stared at the closed door, as though something waited just beyond it. His wife, Evelyn, wasted away upstairs, her once ivory skin now blotched and sunken. The doctor had stopped coming. Too many patients elsewhere, he said. Too many households struck by the same creeping plague. Yet all knew the heart of it beat here, on this land, in this house. The enslaved gathered in hushed knots at night. Their work had slowed, their overseer fallen ill, their chains less watched. But fear bound them tighter than iron. Each whispered story carried Eliza's name like an ember. Some prayed for her release, believing she alone could lift the curse. Others shuddered, fearing her freedom would bring worse. Children woke crying from dreams of the well, swearing they heard voices rise from its depths. Inside the smokehouse, Eliza waited. Her body grew thinner, her lips cracked, yet her eyes remained steady, two dark stars fixed upon the world unseen. She counted the hours by the shifting shadows through the cracks in the wall. Sometimes she whispered, but not to the guards who brought scraps of bread. Her words sank lower, softer, directed downward into the earth itself. And then, one night, the earth answered. The storm arrived sudden, a boiling black sky torn open by lightning. Rain lashed the roofs, hissed through the trees, hammered against the stones of the well. The rope groaned, pulled taut by nothing visible. From the depths came a hollow sound, not splash, not echo, but something like a sigh, rising wet and mournful. The guards abandoned their posts. Even the colonel, standing at his window, felt his heart seize with terror. The storm clawed at the house, tearing shutters from hinges, scattering shingles into the night. Thunder rolled so near it seemed to shake the walls. In the smokehouse, the door rattled on its hinges. The latch gave way. Rain poured in, soaking the ash-covered floor. Eliza stepped across the threshold, her dress clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her brow. She walked without hurry, her bare feet silent in the mud. Those who saw her swore the storm bent around her, as though it cleared a path. She did not run for the fields, nor toward the road, but to the well. The lightning cast her in pale fire as she stood over its mouth, the rain streaking her face. She leaned forward, whispering, and though the storm roared, those nearest claimed they heard her voice. Slow. Steady. Like the chant of some ancient rite. Colonel Josiah stumbled from the porch, his cane sinking into the mud. Girl, he bellowed, though his voice was swallowed by thunder. You'll cease this devilry. He lurched toward her, arm raised as if to strike. But the ground gave way beneath him. The earth around the well trembled, split, slick with rain. He fell to his knees, his cane skittering into the dark. The storm's breath howled through the gap, and for a moment he thought he saw faces, blurred, half-formed, rising in the vapor. Hands stretched upward, not to pull him in, but to hold him down. His scream was brief. The mud swallowed him. The rope of the well snapped and plunged into the void. The storm broke with it, as if the sky itself exhaled. By morning, silence blanketed the plantation. The well lay collapsed, its stones scattered, its mouth sealed in a churn of earth. Colonel Josiah was gone, his cane the only trace. Evelyn remained upstairs, breath shallow, her eyes glazed at the ceiling. By dusk, she too was gone. The enslaved found Eliza standing at the edge of the ruin. Her dress clung with dried mud, her face unreadable. No chains held her. No hands reached for her. She turned and walked toward the tree line, where the woods thickened into shadows. She did not look back. Some claimed she vanished the moment she crossed into the trees. Others swore they saw her years later, wandering roads, untouched by age, her eyes dark with memory. But most said she never left at all, that the land itself had taken her in, that her whispers sank into the roots and stones, binding her spirit to the soil. The plantation withered. Without its master, debts consumed it. The fields grew wild, cabins crumbled, the great house rotted where it stood. Travelers avoided the land, claiming the air tasted of iron, that their horses balked at the well's ruins. Children dared each other to approach, to place an ear to the stones. They said you could still hear her there, whispering beneath the earth, the sound of water stirring though no spring remained. In the years that followed, the tale spread. Preachers called it judgment, a curse upon sin. Neighbors muttered it as warning, mothers hushed it to frighten their young. Yet among the enslaved who remembered, and their children after them, the story lived as something else. A hymn of vengeance. A promise that silence, too, could become a weapon. That even a girl with no sword, no voice in the halls of power, could bend the earth itself against her chains. And so the legend of Eliza endured. The enslaved girl who whispered death into the plantation's well. Some said she was witch, some spirit, some avenger sent by God. Others simply said she was a girl who had nothing left but her will, and that will was enough to bring a house of cruelty to ruin. On summer nights, when the air is heavy and the cicadas fall silent, those who live near the ruins of that land claim to hear the creak of a rope, the splash of unseen water, the murmur of a girl's voice rising from the ground. And if one listens too long, they say, thirst will come upon you, sharp, insatiable, bitter as rust. And in that thirst, you will know her, as the colonel knew her, as the mistress knew her, as all who drank from the well came to know her. Vengeance, whispered soft as breath. Eternal. Patient. Waiting in the water.